Welcome back, everyone, to Tabletop, the podcast where we talk about everything TTRPG and storytelling. Today we're going to be talking about all things original settings, making your own world from scratch. My guest, Daniel, has been doing this for quite some time, and I think that his advice is really valuable. Now, he primarily uses D&D as his system of choice, but a lot of the tidbits that you can pick out of this episode is applicable across systems. I know that I've been using different things we've talked about in this episode for all of my campaigns, which primarily come out of Powered by the Apocalypse-based systems. I hope you all really enjoy this, and as always, you can contact us at tabletopodcast@gmail.com with any questions, and I hope you enjoy the show. How you feeling?
I'm ready to jump in.
We're about to talk D&D.
I've always talked with D&D. I've never done it with a microphone, so this is a first for me.
All right, well, why don't we introduce ourselves? I am Nick. I am a fairly new DM, only having DM'd for like about 2-ish years. And who are you?
I'm Daniel.
Yes.
I've been DMing since 2008. Which has been...
That's a long time. That's a very long time.
I was going to say 2 years isn't so new, but then I've compared it to my own number, and I've decided that, yes, you are baby.
I'm a young child, a young D&D child.
That's my boy. Doing his best.
So Daniel was actually the person who got me into D&D. You kind of dragged me into it. I'd always been interested in playing or running, but I went to a terrible school where nobody wanted to do nerd things. So finally we worked together at a museum. You were like, hey, let's play this thing. We started playing, and ever since it's been wonderful, I have to say.
Yeah, it was a local group for people who lived in Jamaica Plain. And as soon as you got involved, you moved.
Yes, I was just the start, really, and everyone else moved away too. So now it is no longer Jamaica Plains game, but it is continuing. In fact, we played like the beginning of the final arc, I guess, last night.
Yeah, arc number, I don't know.
But part 3
3-year campaign.
I think it might be 4 years at this point.
With breaks. Yeah, with breaks, I guess. Yeah, we're probably up to 4 years.
Yeah. So all of your campaigns that I've ever played in, even your one-offs, they all take place in your sort of home-brewed setting. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today. I think that a lot of people are like, I really want to play D&D. I want to get into it, but I don't want to do it like in, Eberron or, whatever D&D place that they are offering in the books. They want to do their own kind of story, or they want a very specific type of feel. And you have sort of been slowly fine-tuning this setting for like 10 years. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you went about making Coronor?
So, Coronor started as a high school project. I was taking a mythology class where our assignment was create a creation myth, a pantheon of gods, and a destruction myth.
That's actually really dope. That's a great class.
That was our final. That was our final for the class. I worked with a buddy of mine, Clark. We pieced together this really complex sort of tapestry. All of our gods were based off of animals. We had this complicated world beginning. And then after the class was over, I took the materials and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. It was a year later that I discovered D&D as a game. My friend Leap Trot was running it.
Your entire time with D&D, you've also had Coronor with you.
Yes.
Have you always run out of Coronor?
I have not always run out of Coronor. I guess when we first started, we were playing 3.5
Yeah.
solidly.
Right.
So it was the Forgotten Realms my friend
Yeah.
was running. And then as I took over running the games, I ran out of the source books. Like
Right.
whatever gods and lands they had mentioned, the Forgotten Realms novels,
Yeah.
particularly
Drizzt
the
and
ones
stuff.
involving Drizzt. That's what everyone kind of like had a shared knowledge base of.
Yeah.
But after like playing in someone else's world and fact checking and making sure like I had the right people and was portraying them the right way, I was like, it'd be a lot easier and a lot more fun if I had control over everything.
So for you, the change was just like, I want to have a little bit more input over like what the background is and like what can and can't happen in the world and things like
my
that.
ambition was control and power. Completely.
You just authoritarian impulses.
Yeah. I would also like to take this moment to say it's an improv collaboration game, so you have to share, but to found your own world and be the only person who gets to say what happens there. That's the draw.
Okay, so this is an interesting point because like when I've gone about making worlds and everything, I basically start with almost nothing. I start with a town usually, and I start with a basic theory of magic and monsters. So like, are there monsters? If so, what are their origins? And are they like naturally occurring? Are they magical in nature? Whatever. And then how does magic work? Is it drawn out of the air? Is it something you can learn, or is it something you're born with? Whatever. And then, sort of from that, I make a basic backstory about why this is happening, or like what is the sort of main thrust of the story I'm going to tell. And then all the rest of the stuff I make up as we go. But when like I play in Cornor, I set in and you're like, okay, I have like a 300-page document somewhere about like all of the histories and ages and like the Great Freeze and like,
Yes.
all of the first pantheon of gods dying off and this new pantheon coming in and then they're leaving and someone else is, and like you have all of this like tucked away in your brain. Like, how do you strike a balance between that improv and like the stuff that you've written and you have for yourself?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew how to answer that. I don't think there is a balance. I think it's an ebb and flow. The world is built, but it's always changing based on if players have a better idea than one that I had.
So it's just theft. I mean, I 100% endorse thievery.
Interpretation and mimicry, I think.
Yeah.
Not theft.
Sure.
But yeah, you set the stage, and then you just let whatever is going to happen. And then if you have to retcon it, you retcon it later. Who's gonna know?
So when you go about, like, if someone were to sit down with you and say, like, I really want to make my own setting, but I have no idea where to start, where would you start?
You want to start with what is important to you. Like, what kind of game do you want to play?
Do you mean, like, what excites you to write, or what?
Yeah, what kind of story would you want to read about? Do you like political dramas? Do you like action adventure? Do you like intrigue, magic and mystery? You got to start with a theme.
Yeah.
And you can build up from there with what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that tracks with what I do as well. Like when I made one of my settings, it's called Lakewood. I sort of started by saying, like, I really love, cosmic horror. I really like that sort of thing, but I also was really into Gravity Falls at the moment. So I was like, I want to have this like small town that was dealing with like real X-Files level threats of, kind of strange and abnormal things. But then I was like, okay, where does that come from? There's this giant, like, multi-dimensional, unfathomable being that is sort of slumbering, that is creating all this stuff. It's sort of how I got there. So I think that you're right, that you have to start with something that you like, and then you can kind of build around it.
Yeah, decide kind of where you want to go. Like, cosmic horror is its own sort of, like, motif. There's a vibe. There's a collective acceptance of what is and isn't cosmic horror. So a lot of that is just your groundwork. Your skeletal frame is already there once you decide on what you want to do. A lot of people, they want to go, I want to do medieval fantasy. Well, that's plenty to draw from. You kind of already know.
Yeah, there's
what's
like,
happening.
oh, I've never heard of anything in that in that realm before that I could
Right.
look at.
Steampunk is very popular. And again, they kind of decide what's your theme, what's your genre, and then how do I make this mine?
Yeah. I think also something that you said really resonates with me, which is like genre. Like 100%, I'm sort of under the impression that like as long as your characters are feeling a certain way, it doesn't matter the specifics. Like if you can capture the feeling of a place, and more often than not, that comes from a genre than a like some specific origin myth or whatever.
Yeah.
Like if you can capture that feeling and the tropes of that genre, whether you subvert them or not, I think that that's really important too. So yeah, starting from genre is smart. I like that.
Yeah, well, and also as your players explore the world, they're not exploring the world from an academic standpoint either.
Unless
So
they're
it's-
playing like all wizards who are like, I want to study this world.
Right. They're going to get their lore and their world building from the other characters that live in it. So you also don't need a bunch of like academic papers. I do have food webs in a notebook. What preys on what? How do the animals exist?
Yeah.
But that's because one of my favorite subjects is biology.
Yeah.
So I kind of want the biology of my world
To feel
to
real.
make sense.
Yeah.
So when I was trying to explain monsters, I was like, well, they're not going to be able to support themselves in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
They're too big. They're too destructive. How do I get monsters?
Yeah.
That's why I invented sort of the rift phenomenon.
Right. Things
Where
falling through.
The magic just sort of like comes in places and tears space-time, and
Yeah.
things mutate if they're too close or things pass through. And that's why since we've been playing, even when they're not like mentioned or a big part of the plot, you the players and people of the world know rifts are no good.
Yeah.
They're naturally occurring phenomenons, and they're best to be avoided.
That's actually really funny. I've never once as a player in the game thought about like the ecology of where we were, but it like I'm kind of
I'm glad I'm getting that across.
but I'm kind of thinking back on it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because like there was that time where we were in like the fields and there were those like raptor bird things that I tried to tame.
Yeah, the Remiornes.
Yeah, and they were like in near the river because they were feeding upon like marrow and like the smaller animals around. So it's interesting. I just never thought about it. Like I guess it's sort of like how we're like, oh hey, look, there's a rabbit, but we also know that like hawks eat rabbits, but we don't really think about that.
Yeah, you see the
very
rabbit,
much.
you expect the wolves and the hawks.
Yeah.
I want my world to be like, oh yeah, there's a predatory bird on these coastal plains.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're staying near the food sources. That I want it to make sense. I want it to make so much sense that you don't actually question it. You're
Yeah.
just like, oh yeah, this monster would be here.
Yeah.
This creature, this fantastical beast is where I would find it right
Yeah.
here.
So the next step then would be to try to, and I think this is maybe the hardest part about having your own setting, is then imparting knowledge onto players about your setting. Like what you just said, like some of it you don't want them to ever think about. It just works and it makes the world tick, and then they interact with it without even knowing it. But how do you give information to the players? Because like one of the biggest things I think in tabletop games is when you as the GM are describing something and then a player says like, would I know something about that? And you know what I mean? Like the lack of the player knowledge versus the character knowledge. How do you go about like imparting world lore, I guess?
One thing I do, because I'm really aiming for King of the Nerds, is I have the primer that I try to have and give out to everyone who sits on my game for the first time. And the primer is basically just, this is all the information a person who lives in this world would know. The names of countries, the general like weather and climate of certain areas, the different species of humanoids and flora and fauna that could be found there. And I'm like, this is what your character would know about. If
Yeah.
you don't read it, then your personal character doesn't know about it.
Yeah, right.
Because they are a city person, maybe. And then I hope you paid attention to the city politics version of the primer.
Yeah.
Another way to do that is make it relevant to the story. If you want people to know about the world, how it interacts, then while they're going on an adventure, make one of the challenges having to deal with the weird weather systems that exist in your world.
Yeah.
That'll get them thinking about it, and that way it'll always be in their background. And you're not being like, oh, just so you know, here's how weather works while we're playing. It's like, no, the weather is doing this. Figure out how you're going to
solve whatever. Yeah.
How are you going to survive this moment in the wilderness?
Yeah. So also something that kind of comes up sometimes is that, like, during especially like a longer campaign, stuff can, slowly develop and all that kind of stuff. How do you stay true to your core, like, genre or belief about the beginning of your setting versus like where you are 3 years down the line? Do you just say, like you said, it's constantly changing, it adapts or whatever due to the players, or is there something that you do to try to kind of steer? Because you play like a lot of open world campaigns where we kind of just like trot around wherever we want to go and kind of stumble upon weird adventures and stuff.
And one way, that's how I keep the world going in my direction, keeping you moving so that you don't over-influence one particular point.
Right.
And change things. You're always adapting to the new things that you're coming up and learning more about. And another, again, D&D, it's all about collaborative storytelling. Just you tell your players what's kind of happening, and most of the time, players will react to your world as you have described it. They're not going to go out of their way to make something change or happen differently.
Yeah.
And if they do try, well, magic's a thing that exists. So maybe this one time magic has warped it a bit.
Yeah, right. I think that also this is a good distinction between D&D and other TTRPGs, like the one that we're playing right now, which is my Westwood campaign. Mm-hmm. I really encourage you guys to tell me how certain things in the world work, or certain places function, or who is where and stuff like that, because I really want to rope you guys into like having a buy-in to the world.
Yeah.
So I guess there is sort of like two different philosophies there as well, of like you said, keep people moving through, and they're sort of they are experiencing the world influence them, and they are going to have to deal with that. And I think the other philosophy that I would also recommend giving a try is like having your players influence the world directly and change it dramatically. And those are two wildly different campaigns and wildly different sort of settings and feelings, but they are both like super valid. I think that's really cool.
I feel that second practice works best with the other games that I don't think are designed to last for as long.
Right.
In which case you don't really commit to anything.
Yeah.
Or they're really good for something that you're building early, and maybe say you don't actually have a good understanding, or you haven't crossed all your T's yet, is to let the players then inform you of how they think things should work, and wrap that into what you're building yourself.
Yeah. I think that, in my opinion, it's super important to also honor character stuff in their backstories and everything. So like I would suggest that if you are trying to build your own campaign setting as well, that if you're doing a session 0, or if you're starting your first campaign in a homemade setting, to really make sure your characters write something that functions within the world as you are going to create it. Don't make like somebody being like, yeah, I raised dragons for a living. I was like a dragon farmer. And then your setting's like, oh, dragons have been dead for 500 years. So it just doesn't work that way,
Right, which is a good point to mention, because in my games, the dragons have been extinct for centuries.
Right.
Everyone hates it. But it was part of my world building mythos and my cryosis part of like why the world works the way that it does. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you do set up things that players are like, I want a pet dragon. Well, you can't have one. They're all dead.
Yeah, and in that way you can kind of exert limits, especially in like a open world campaign where there aren't very many guardrails. You can kind of enforce a few things.
Some things are very specific to your campaign setting, and you need to let people know well in advance what those are. You don't want to wait till the last minute, get everyone's character sheet handed in, and then start making notes about your world and be like, oh, people get attached to their characters real quick, and you don't want to take things that are instrumental to like their core aspects.
Yeah. Cool. Well, is there anything else you would recommend to folks who are trying to build their own campaign? So far we have like start with something that you're really excited about, look into your genre, and then build from there. Like, I really like the idea that you, from that assignment that you had, like build a creation myth and a destruction myth and like a pantheon of gods or whatever governs.
Yeah, I still have those, and they'll never come up because I'm never going to play a game where the world is born or dies.
Yeah.
But I know how it started, how it'll end, and that's also good for the theme of the world, kind of knowing like the why things are happening the way they do as events unfold throughout the history.
Right. It's like you kind of have a trajectory that you can stay on.
I would definitely say if you are world building, have a timeline, not like a year by year timeline, but kind of know what's going on in each century, like 3 or 4 major events for every 100 years, so you kind of know what's happening. If it's in the future of your game, that's not too important because, again, your players are going to be doing big things if you get to a high level of campaign.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to be one of those 3 or 4 things in a century. But you should definitely know, like, your world's history enough to know why the countries are where they are, or why the land masses are broken or formed the way that they are.
Or like why certain kingdoms don't talk to each other or whatever.
Right. Know what's been happening. Know who has beef with who.
Yeah, exactly. The general political layout. Yeah, I think that's smart, just having a general sense. This might be, you might disagree with this.
I really disagree about things.
I really resonate when you said like 3 or 4 things. I would caution new people who are trying to build their own setting not to get mired down in like every individual detail, because I think that kind of slows you down and it can kind of get you distracted from the more important things, which, like we said, is like what are the big things that are happening when you're setting your campaign? What is the general feeling that you're going for? What are the, how does it feel to live in this place or in this, world during your campaign? I feel like it's way more important than like the intricacies of like how coins are made. But if you want to do that, do it, because it's like, that's cool. But
yeah, if coin collecting is your thing, throw that in there.
Yeah.
But if you just feel like you need a history of coins, you don't. No one in your game is going to be looking at how the coin system works. They will take their gold and they will be happy.
Yeah, and like conversely to the point I just made, I think that if you are really into something, like your hobby is biology, you said, so you made those food webs, and if someone's hobby is like how to make coins or blacksmithing or whatever, really get into it, because I think that like if you're like, yeah, like I see this blacksmith's making stuff, what kind of swords does he have? And you're like, well, this blacksmith specializes in like folded metal swords, and like then you just describe the like intense detail and that this blacksmith goes through or whatever. That's going to add like a level of richness to the campaign, especially if you're like this kingdom's culture is steeped in martial tradition, and so their swords are made a certain way to last through 100 battles or whatever, because they value their weapons more than their like cooking equipment, something like that. Like that's going to be super cool for your players to be like, this is fucking awesome. So
always follow your dreams.
Yeah.
When you're setting your game, put your hobbies into it to give players more of an anchor to put themselves into it.
And also, like, usually, unless you're doing this kind of randomly, I guess, you're playing with some people hopefully maybe some people you like, and you're kind of sharing that part of yourself with your friends, and that's, always a great thing.
I like at least 2/3 of the people that I play with.
Yeah, there's a couple of campaigns you told me about that dropped off real quick.
Real quick.
It's tough.
And that'll happen too.
Yeah. I guess you're coming up on ending a campaign within your setting.
That's
Any
right.
advice on closing up a setting?
Burn bridges really, really make everyone hate you.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically how you operate from day to day.
That is kind of like how I run a game anyhow, is, all right, what's going to happen? And then give no quarter, make no excuses, fudge 0 rolls. That is not true. I'm very nice to my players. They could all go a lot worse a lot of the times. But yeah, as I'm wrapping up, one of the things that I like to do is like to figure out what the characters want. What do they want to see happen? What are their own stakes that they want to see resolved or concluded to make the end of the campaign actually matter to them? And then write down some stuff that they did. And you know what? Now you have a mythos for future campaigns. I have 2 NPCs in this current game, Scalpel and Roland, who are just pullovers from another game I tried to run.
Yeah.
At a job I was working at, and that fell apart. But I was like, I really liked these 2 characters and how they interacted with each other, and now I've taken them, and they're part of this time frame. They're part of this campaign.
Yeah.
They're not huge in the story, but they've been around in the background for all of it, and I think they've been pretty popular.
Yeah.
I think people have enjoyed seeing them when they pop up.
And now we're in a huge army on army combat situation, and they're like generals. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Keep friends that your characters make around.
Yeah.
I feel like a universal truth is players like seeing characters that they've helped or interacted with come back.
Yeah.
And they especially love to see a character that got one over on them show back up for a chance of revenge.
Yeah.
I
Always.
think we derailed an entire adventure one time. I had a one-off villain. His name was Goldrag. He was a beholder.
Oh my god.
I had him show up.
Wait, was that a one-off? Because that was the whole first year and a half of that campaign.
I tried to get you away from that beholder, but you wouldn't let it go.
He scammed us, man. We had to fucking kill him.
Exactly. It was a scam. It was a setback, and they did not. You didn't leave.
Yeah.
You literally put roots down, found places to live, and would not leave until you had a chance to go back for that beholder. I was like, I have to write an entire new arc.
Yeah. And
to
we
deal with this.
And we blew up an entire parapet of a castle, killing it. It was the best.
Windmill. It was
the
a
windmill
on top of a cliff over a river.
Yeah, and we did a flower explosion.
You filled the room up with flour, and then you fireballed it to give it more of a bang. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I guess that's how physics work.
I don't fucking care.
I don't fucking know.
I like biology, not physics.
I'm a biologist, not a chemist.
Well, Daniel, any parting words for our wonderful guests listening?
Build what you like. Play with it as much as you can. And always be willing to change it to keep it fresh and engaging for whatever you're writing for in the moment.
Well, I think those are good words to end with. So, Daniel?
I had really great words there.
I mean, wow. It's just the best words I've ever heard you speak.
Christ, I'm so good at words.
Well, Daniel, I'm sure we'll have you back on soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone, that is the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. If you really enjoy the show, please give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. It really helps us get our podcast out there. And as always, if you do have questions, send them to tabletopodcast@gmail.com. We would love to answer them on a future episode. Thanks so much.